Chapter 32. Grandpa's Water-Powered Mill, 1920s. Nose to the grinding stone. Pay attention. Keep your nose to the grinding stone till I get back. For centuries before the first settlers came to the Ozark Hills, native Indians had grown or gathered a variety of nuts and grains, which they would often process by grinding them into a powder. This powder was then made into cakes and baked or mixed into other foods, such as meat and berries, to make a type of panicum. Grinding nuts and grains allowed for easier chewing and digesting them. Large stones used for grinding were cupped to hold the material, while a smaller handheld stone was used to crush and grind the food into a powder. Over time, the wearing of the stone increased its hollowness. After the native people left the Ozarks, their larger grinding stones were found near old camps or under bluff shelters. Some of these stones were used by the settlers for watering chickens or to feed livestock salt. A nice stone was found and used by Riley Harness on Bear Creek, and many years later, Troy Harness brought it to his home in Harrison. The Indian Rock is still in the possession of the family. The author also has a small grinding stone found on Bear Creek near the area of Jenny Harness's cabin. The earliest settlers that came to the hills had nothing better than pounding rocks or blunt ends of wood to make meal from the grains they grew. As soon as time and availability of hardware could be acquired, many communities celebrated having a water-powered mill to do the long and monotonous job of grinding. The chore was so boring that the term grind was used for any work that was hard and dull to finish. While a mill could be powered with a horse walking in a circle, this was done mostly with sorghum molasses and not with grain. Water was by far the best method to harness motion and power. Most mills in the Ozarks needed water that would flow fast and with enough volume to spin the water wheel with regulated speed. Some required a mill pond to achieve the water requirements, and other mills were situated where the falling water stream required little to no pounding. But the mill had to be positioned so that flooding would not wash the structure away. The dust created by the mill was also a fire hazard, and many mills either burned or washed away in time. The title of those who owned and operated a watermill was a miller. For someone to construct an Ozark watermill, they had to have some components made and shipped to them from back east. Iron was forged for some working parts, and millstones had to be crafted with special tools from hard stone not found in the Ozark Hills. A stone that was not extremely hard would wear down and allow grit to be mixed into the flour or meal. Most grindstones came from France or from an industrial source that used granite. The French borestones could grind very fine. The millstones were not cut from one piece, but built using sections of quartz cemented together and shrink-fit with an iron band. Slots in the band allowed for lifting the heavy stone. It was very important that the stone be balanced so that it would spin without wobbling. With both granite and quartz, a pattern was cut on one side of the stone with groves called furrows, and the area between called lands. The combination allowed the grain to be cracked and ground to a fine flour before it fell from between the stones. The lowest stone is called the bed stone and does not turn, while the upper stone is called the runner stone, as it spins and causes a scissoring of the two rocks which cracked, cut, and ground the grain. Wheat flour had to be finely ground, but cornmeal was coarse ground, and a good miller took pride in his flour or meal. Few areas in the Ozarks grew wheat constantly. Therefore, most of the hill folks had to buy flour and ate cornmeal mostly. Some barley and oats were grown in areas where wheat grew poorly. Having some form of daily bread was critical to the lifestyles of people from all ages. The lack of bread was considered harsh poverty and brought with it emotional and spiritual hunger for the staff of life, as bread was named. George Perry Ruff was born on Richland Creek in 1875 to Henry Lewis Ruff. George grew up and lived in Searcy County most of his long life of 87 years. He married Ari Gibson, Scottish, and lived near the Whit Springs community. To them was born Martha, Bertha, Richard, James, Garland, and a nephew, Earl Gibson, who they raised after his mother died. Ari claimed that on her mother's side of the family, Louise Tucker was a full-blooded Cherokee Indian and the father of Orange Tucker, born in 1822 in Tennessee. Orange Tucker is buried in Crossroads Cemetery in Boone County, AR, 1893. A son, Richard Henry Ruff, who was born April 19, 1901, attended the Shady Grove School, called the Harness School by some, southeast of Whit Springs, as did James Riley Harness. The school was on land that had been deeded for a school and surrounded by the farm and orchard of William Alexander Harness. The two boys learned basic skills in the one-room schoolhouse, and their paths would cross again in years to come. How intriguing to think about two young boys growing up to have children who would marry and one day become my parents. My siblings and I would come from family stock raised on the heights of wit. Water mills had been built on several streams in Searcy County, of which many established the communities that sprang up around them. The water-powered mill became both a necessity and an attraction to local folks. Going to have your grain ground was an opportunity to watch the first power-driven machinery for many youngsters. Watching the water flow over the big wheel, making it spin, was entertaining to all comers, and the sound of gears and stones turning vibrated the floor beneath you like an approaching train. It took about 2 hours to grind 100 pounds of grain. Not all ground corn was for cornmeal. Some was for making corn whiskey. Both corn and barley were ground to make ingredients for moonshine, bread for the family, and hooch for others. The necessity of going to the mill to have your grain ground also gave those living in remote areas visiting time with people. You might have to wait your turn as other families brought their grain and family. Children played and grown-ups talked. Having little contact, news about people and the world was eagerly sought after by those who lived a lonely and isolated life. Sometimes the ears of dried corn were hauled at the mill, and while they visited, it was shucked, and the ears ran through a corn sheller. The hand-cranked machine would shell the kernels, which dropped into a basket, and the cobs into another container. It was important that the corn kernels be dried enough to make good cornmeal that wouldn't mold. Around the year of 1920, George Perry Ruff completed his watermill just outside the town of Whit Springs. A picture was made of the new mill, with his wife and children in front of the water wheel. The town sits at about 1,900 feet in elevation, and the new mill took advantage of a spring that was only a couple city blocks away. Being on the edge of Whit Springs, the mill was situated close to stores and the post office that was established in 1874. Merchant stores, a blacksmith shop, a tanning yard, and a drugstore served the community. Other grist mills and sawmills were in the area, but the mill of G.P. Ruff was almost in town. Few, if any, water-powered mills in the Ozarks were located at the elevation of wit. The rough water-powered mill was built of logs and was small compared to other larger water mills built on rivers. George made his mill with a belt drive, so he could grind grain or change the power over to work with wood. He liked to make things with wood, and he added a lathe for turning wood legs and arms for chairs. A rocking chair made by him is still in the possession of the Riley Harness family, Mel Harness. George also crafted things like a fiddle. Using a pocket knife and a few other crude tools, he could turn sawdust and shavings into a wood box, ready for someone to make its steel strings sing the songs of the hill people. His granddaughter, Emily Ruff Harness, would share that he would tune and rosen up the bow and start the beginning of a song, but nothing more. George never learned to play the instruments he made. A fiddle he made is still in possession of the Richard Ruff family, Wayne Ruff. I recall seeing unfinished pieces of a fiddle on the back porch of his house in the early 1960s. He also made the wood stock of a shotgun owned by the Earl Harness family, Roger Harness. And he apparently had some blacksmith skills as he made a complete rifle. George was a miller, a gunsmith, and a woodwright. Men like him were a real asset to rural communities, such as Whit Springs, which were so remotely located and limited in resources and services. His skills were handed down to his family members, who were also handy at making things from scratch. As George was building his mill, James Riley Harness and his new wife, Melinda Turney, began their family across Bear Creek Hollow at Atlas. Welcome home. William Earl Harness and brother Charles Clifford Harness were born on the mountain at Atlas, and in the future their younger brother Roy Alexander would also be born there near the home of Giles and Jody Turney. Giles and his son-in-law Riley farmed, and where they took their corn to be ground is not known, but the advent of steam power had overtaken many of the water-powered mills, and some hand-cranked grist mills were available at locations. However, the hand-cranked was slow and tiring compared to the mills. Riley traded a saddle with his schoolmate Richard Ruff as adults. No details have been preserved other than the two men having contact. Possibly they had seen each other at Whit Springs and worked out a trade. The annual grave decoration at Whit was a big event and drew many people in attendance. That might have been how they made contact, or it might have happened as Riley went to the mountain farm of his father at Whit. Billy was operating his apple orchard, and Riley probably helped him at times with picking and such. Reflection. The friendship between Riley Harness and Richard Ruff would someday become the uniting of two families. Their common faith, friendship, and heritage would be lifelong. For some of us, both men would be our grandpas. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. Proverbs 17:17